How was your day? Maybe you were the one holding something steady today, quietly, without being thanked. The kind of work no one really sees from the outside. There's a young warrior in the old Irish stories who once held a whole country alone, not because no one else could because no one else could come. If today felt a little like that, he'd understand. Settle in now. You can let the day go. The story is old, and the old stories know how to wait while you fall asleep. We'll start at the ford, where the water is shallow and the morning is cold. Cold air that fills the chest, the creak of leather, the smell of wet stone and bruised grass. A young man steps out onto the pale stones of the river alone and waits for an army to come. They come down through the trees on the far side. Hundreds, then thousands, banners on long spear shafts. The young man on the stones does not step back. He has been told he is the only one who can stand here. Why would a young man stand on a stone in a cold river and not step back? Not for glory, he has glory already. He stands there because every man in his country is, for a strange reason, unable to lift a spear. A curse, an old one. The men of Ulster have been put into the pains of a woman in childbirth, all at once, for 9 days and 9 nights. They cannot rise, and so a boy who is half a god stands on a stone instead. His name is Chulainn, the Hound of Ulster. He's 17, maybe younger. The stories don't quite agree. What they agree on is the river, the stone, and the way he kept showing up day after day. This is what we do here. One old story, one night. Something that happened a long time ago, and still has something to say to a tired person on a Tuesday. Get comfortable now, adjust the pillow, pull the blanket up. If you fall asleep before the end, that's allowed. The old Irish gods were patient. They watched over sleeping people for a long time. This is only the beginning of his story. The famous parts, the ford, the friend, the standing stone, those are still ahead. But not tonight. Tonight, just this. If tonight felt like something, subscribe. We'll be here next week. Another old story, another night like this one. Now, back to his. Long before the ford, he was a small boy with a hurling stick. Not Chulainn yet. His first name was Setanta. He lived by the grey sea with his mother and the sound of seabirds. His mother told him there were warriors at his uncle's fort, far inland, the Red Branch, the best of Ireland. He listened in the way a small boy listens, already deciding to go. One morning he set off alone, a small boy, a hurling stick, a leather ball, a road that ran inland through whitethorn hedges. He hit the ball ahead of him as he walked, then caught up to it, then again, for days. He came to Emain Macha, the great round fort of his uncle, King Conchobar. He walked in through a gate that should not have opened for him, and onto a green where 100 boys were already playing the same game. It is said that when he was angry as a boy, really angry, something happened to him that no other child in Ireland could do. His face would change, his body would change. The grown warriors stopped laughing the day they first saw it. But that's later. Tonight he is still only Setanta, walking onto a green among strangers, a hurling stick in his hand. The ford is still years away. The army is still a story no one has begun to tell. The boys on the green at Emain Macha did not stop their game for the small boy at the gate. He walked straight into the middle of them, lifted his hurling stick, and joined the play without asking. This is, by every account, the way he announced himself, not with a speech, not with a name, with the small body of a boy stepping into a game he was not invited into, and then, somehow, winning it. They turned on him for it. 100 boys, with hurling sticks. They thought they would teach him not to come uninvited. That was when his face changed for the first time, in front of grown men. King Conchobar saw it happen from a window in the hall. He came out very fast for a king. He put his own hand on the small shoulder and called the boys off and asked the boy's name. The boy gave it, Setanta, son of his own sister. He took the boy into the hall and gave him a place at the long benches with the others. Maybe you know that small relief, when someone in charge finally notices and decides you belong, and the room agrees. He grew there, not like the others, faster in some ways, slower in others. The boy troop learned not to test him after the first time. The grown men learned to watch where he was and to step easily around him. The old harpers at the hall told him stories at night. The Tuatha De Danann under the hills, the Morrigan who came as a crow, the cattle that were more than cattle, and the queens who wanted them. He learned in those nights what his country was: a green land, a gray sea, a people who loved single combat more than war, and a single brave word more than a long, careful one. He grew taller, not by much. He would always be shorter than the men around him. But something in him stretched, the way certain things stretch in fire, until he was a different shape than the others, even sitting still. He learned weapons, he learned them too quickly. The arms master had to make him slower on purpose, so the other boys could keep up. There's a kindness in that when you think about it. Hold back so the others don't feel small. The waiting was not empty. The waiting was the work. He was building something in those years, slowly. The men of Ulster did not yet know they would one day need him to hold a river. One spring evening, a druid named Cathbad spoke a prophecy in the hall. "Whoever takes up arms today," he said, "will be a great warrior and short-lived." The boy heard it from the doorway. He stepped forward. He asked for arms. The king's spears broke in his hands. The king's chariots broke under his weight. They had to bring him the king's own spear and the king's own chariot before they held. He took them and walked out. He knew the prophecy, short-lived. He did not ask for it to be taken back. Some choices are like that. You know what they cost on the day you make them, and you make them anyway. Maybe you know that kind of choice. It was not the only prophecy he chose. There would be others. The old stories are full of moments when he could have stepped back and didn't. Maybe that's why the country kept telling his story long after he was gone. His charioteer was a young man called Laeg. They were almost the same age. They understood each other without needing to speak. If you've ever had a friend like that, you already know the shape of this part of the story. Lach drove, Chulainn fought. That was how it worked. But on the long days between the famous moments, they sat by the same small fires and ate the same hard bread, and the country mostly didn't see them at all. Around the same year, he heard about a girl. He heard about her before he saw her. They said she had every gift a woman should have: wisdom, beauty, good sense, skilled hands, the 7 things, and she was at Dún Forgaill on a high green hill. Her name was Emain. Her father was a hard man called Forgaill, who did not want a young warrior to come anywhere near her. Forgaill had heard about Chulainn too, and decided to put as many tests between them as he could. Chulainn took Laeg in the chariot and drove up the long road to Dún Forgaill anyway. He did not announce himself at the gate. He stopped on the grass below the wall, where Emain was working at her embroidery. They spoke in riddles. The old Irish liked their courtships that way. He spoke of where he had been. She answered with where she would not go. Each riddle was a small map of who they were. It was not love at first sight. It was something steadier than that. 2 people recognizing each other in the way 2 people sometimes do, and deciding without quite saying so that they would wait for each other. Before any of that, before Emain, before the king's chariot, before he took up arms, there was the night his name changed. He was still Setanta then. He was small. He was hungry. He was running late to a feast. King Conchobar had been invited to feast at the house of a smith named Chulainn. The king asked the boy to come. The boy said yes, but I have to finish my game first. I'll follow after. The king nodded and rode on. At Chulainn's house they were welcomed in and seated near the hearth. The doors were closed. The smith asked if anyone else was coming. The king had forgotten the boy. He said no. The smith loosed his great hound for the night. That hound was the size of a calf. People said 3 men could not hold it. It was meant to guard the forge after the doors were closed. Nothing was meant to come through the yard after dark. Nothing usually tried. But the boy was coming. He had finished his game. He was walking up the road in the dark, hurling stick over one shoulder, leather ball in his hand, humming something his mother had hummed when he was very small. The hound heard him. The hound rose from where it had lain in the yard. The hound came across the packed earth low and fast, all teeth and weight, a thing built to stop anyone the smith had not named. Inside the forge they heard it. The king stood up, white. "The boy is dead," he said. The smith dropped his ale and ran for the door. They opened it onto the yard, expecting the worst thing they had ever seen. They saw the boy standing. The hound lay still on the packed earth. He had used his hurling stick to drive the leather ball straight down the great hound's throat, and the dog had fallen at his feet without a sound. The smith looked at the boy and at the dog, and his face changed. That hound had been his guard for many years. He had no other. He did not speak for a long minute. The king watched and did not push him. The boy spoke first. He said something simple. He said, "I will be your hound. I will guard your forge. I will watch the road for you. Until you can train another, I will be the dog that lies in the yard." The smith looked at him a long time. The king nodded slowly. The druid Cathbad, who had been at the feast, spoke into the quiet. "From this night," he said, "your name is Chulainn, the Hound of Chulainn." That is how he got his second name, by killing a guard dog he had not been told about and then offering to become one. That tells you, more than any battle, who he was at heart. He kept his word for the next year while the smith trained a new hound. The boy slept curled in the doorway of the forge through the long nights. The neighbors got used to it. The road got used to it. He was where he was meant to be. The cave did not change her all at once. The yard did not change him all at once either. It gave him a name to grow into, and a doorway to keep, and the slow work of being trusted by someone he had hurt. He never lost the name. Long after the smith had a new hound and Chulainn had grown into the body of a young warrior, men still called him by it, the Hound, as if the offer at the doorway was the truest thing about him. That is one way you learn what kind of warrior someone is, not by what they break, but by what they offer to mend after the breaking. The old stories knew this, and kept it quiet, and waited for us to notice. Years later, on the cold stone of the ford, when an army began to come through the trees, that was the name a warrior on the far bank shouted across the river, the Hound, as if to remind himself why he should still be afraid. But that is still ahead. Tonight he is still small, still curled in the doorway of a forge, still a boy who killed a dog and then promised to be one. The country is still safe. The river is still only a river. Let that picture stay with you for a while. A boy in a doorway, a banked fire behind him, a road outside that nobody is coming down. He sleeps, the forge sleeps, the country sleeps, for now. These stories were not written down for a long time. They were told, by harpers, by mothers, by old men around the central fire. The Ulster cycle they came to be called. The cycle around Chulainn. Some of them were finally set down on parchment by monks in stone cells, centuries after the events they describe. The monks did not always agree with the warriors in the stories. They kept the stories anyway. There is a kindness in that too. To copy down a story you do not entirely approve of because you know the country needs it. The monks who kept the Hound of Ulster did not need to like him. They only needed to remember him. That is how the story reached us. Through firesides, through monks, through mothers at bedsides, through a long, quiet chain of people who decided that a small boy in a yard with a hurling stick deserved to be carried forward. Maybe that is the part of the story you are part of now, lying in your bed far from any forge, the old name still passing through the dark. The Hound, the boy, the doorway, the promise, carried again. Back to the courtship now. Chulainn drove home from Dún Forgaill that evening without a yes from Eimir's father. But Eimir herself, on the bench inside the gate, had answered him without anyone else noticing. Forgaill did what worried fathers in old stories do. He invited the young warrior to a feast, served him strong ale, and tried to suggest that there was, somewhere overseas, a teacher who could turn a promising fighter into a perfect one. Her name, said Forgaill, was Scáthach, a warrior woman. She lived alone on a bleak island in a cold sea. Few who tried to reach her ever did. He hoped, very privately, that Chulainn would never come back from the trip. Chulainn heard the suggestion and the trap at the same time. He decided to take the suggestion. If learning more would let him come home worthy of Eimir, he would learn more. Sometimes a trap is a path you walk anyway. He went home to Murthamney first. He walked into the small round stone house at Dún Delgan, where his mother sat at the loom, and told her where he was going. She did not try to stop him. She did slow him down enough to give him bread. Then he walked to Dún Forgaill again. He did not go to the gate this time. He stood at the foot of the long green slope below the wall, where Eimir could see him from the watch platform, and he waited for her to come down. She came. She crossed the inner ground. She came through a small side gate. She walked down the long slope on her own. She wore the green overdress. She wore the bronze torque. She wore the calm she had been wearing since the day she met him. They spoke quietly at the foot of the hill. He told her about Scáthach. He told her about the sea. He told her he would come back. She did not say be careful. She said, come back, and then she turned and walked up the hill again. That was the last he saw of her for a year, maybe more. The old stories are not careful about the exact number of months. They are careful about the weight of the year between two promises. Maybe you know that kind of waiting. Not dramatic. The quieter kind, the kind where nothing moves outside, but something inside you is changing anyway. The kind a thread of embroidery understands better than a person does. He went to the harbor. He found a small wooden ship and a small crew willing to take a young warrior across to the eastern shore. The voyage was rough. He did not speak much. He looked east a lot. He came at last to the place Forgaill had named. A black cliff above a cold gray sea, a narrow stone causeway arching across a deep chasm, and halfway across, a small fire burning on the far headland that did not seem to be tended by anyone. They said the bridge would not hold those who were not worthy. They said it threw the unworthy off into the chasm before they reached the far side. They said Scáthach watched from her doorway, who could and could not cross. He stepped onto the stones. The bridge did not throw him. He crossed it the way someone crosses a river that has decided to let them across. And when he reached the far side, Scáthach was already standing in her doorway waiting for him. She did not greet him warmly. She did not greet him coldly. She looked at him the way a smith looks at a piece of iron, measuring how much heat it will take, how much hammering it will allow, how much it will sing. Stay with this for a moment. Stay with this image. A young warrior, finally where he was meant to be. On the edge of a hard year, being measured by the only teacher in the world who could finish him. There's a strange peace in that. The training was hard, harder than anything he had done in Ulster. Scáthach made him run before dawn, and climb the cliffs barefoot, and stand in the cold sea up to the chest until the small bones of his hands forgot what warm meant. She made him learn weapons he had never seen. Twin short swords, like the ones she carried across her back. Throwing knives, the barbed bone-tipped spear that would one day be his, the gaibolg, that no one else in the world could throw. She showed him the spear throw with the foot. He did not understand at first. She showed him again. You drop the spear into the water, she said, and you guide it with the foot. He learned it slowly. Then well, then better than anyone alive. Other young warriors were on the island. They had come from many places. They sparred with him at dawn and ate the same dry bread at dusk. He did not become close to most of them. He became close to one. His name was Ferdia. He was older. He was taller. He was broad-shouldered where Chulainn was wiry. His skin had a strange, faint ridging on the forearms like the grain of antler that no spear point could break. They learned from Scáthach together. They sparred with each other every day. They learned each other's small habits, the way Ferdia guarded the left, the way Chulainn dropped his shoulder before the second strike, the kind of knowing only friends learn. Scáthach watched them spar. She did not always speak. When she did, she said only what was needed. Sometimes she said slower. Sometimes she said again. Sometimes, very rarely, she said yes. That word was worth more than a year. Chulainn and Ferdia were called foster brothers by the end of that year. Not because they were born to the same family, because they had learned the same craft at the same hand. And that was a deeper kind of brotherhood in the old Irish world. Remember that, for later. The two of them on a stone bench at the edge of a cliff, sharing one small fire and one horn cup of water. Some friendships are quiet enough that you don't see, at the time, how much you'll need them. Scáthach taught Chulainn the gaibolg last. She did not teach Ferdia the same throw. She said only that not everyone on her island would carry that weapon. She did not say why. Maybe she already saw the river that was waiting. She let him keep the spear. She said it was his now. She said only one warrior in a generation could carry it, and only one warrior in a generation needed to. She did not say which generation he was meant to be. When the year ended, Scáthach told him quietly that he was finished. She did not say goodbye in a long way. She said only, you may go home, and then, more quietly, come back if you ever need to remember. He sailed home. Ferdia stayed a little longer on the island, then went back to his own people in Connacht, which was the country of Queen Medb. Neither of them at the time thought that mattered very much. Both of them were wrong. Chulainn came back to Ireland a different shape, not bigger, the shape of someone who has been hammered and tempered for a year. he went straight to Dún Forgaill. This time, he did not stop at the foot of the slope. Forgaill saw him coming up the road. Forgaill did not open the gate. Forgaill locked it. The young warrior on the slope did not slow down. He had not waited a year on a cold island to be turned back at a wooden gate. We'll stay there, for now. We leave him on the slope for a while. The story turns south now, to a different hall, in a different country, to Connacht in the west, to a long bed in a great oak-walled bedchamber, where a king and a queen are talking about wealth. Her name was Medb. She was the queen of Connacht. Her husband was a kind enough man called Ailill. They were comparing what each of them had brought into the marriage. The old Irish thought of this as a real and reasonable conversation between equals. They counted cup for cup, cloak for cloak, sword for sword, horse for horse, cow for cow. They came out almost exactly equal. Almost Ailill, it turned out, had one white bull that Medb could not match. She had owned the bull's brother as a calf. The calf had decided, the way calves sometimes do, that it would rather belong to a king than a queen. It had walked itself out of her herd and into her husband's, that had stung. She heard that night of another bull, the brown bull of Cooley. It was said to be the only animal in Ireland that could match her husband's white one. It lived in Ulster. It belonged to a chieftain who would not sell. Maybe you can already see where this is going. She sent messengers north to Cooley. She offered cattle, gold, and the use of her own friendship for the loan of the bull. The chieftain agreed. He even welcomed the messengers to a feast at his house. That was where it went wrong. The messengers drank too much. One of them said, more loudly than was wise, if the chieftain had not agreed, the queen would have come and taken the bull anyway. The chieftain heard. The chieftain stopped smiling. The next morning he sent the messengers home empty. Medb heard the report. She did not shout. She did not throw a horn cup. She sat down by the central fire in her hall, looked into the flames for a while, and then said to her household, "Gather every warrior in Connacht. We will go and get the bull ourselves." The army that gathered in Connacht over the next weeks was not small. Allies came from Leinster and Munster. Warriors came from across the Western Sea. By the time it began to move north, it was the largest army the country had ever seen. They marched east, then north. They were slow. They had to be slow to feed an army that large. You bring most of a country with you. Cooks, wagons, druids, smiths, wives, children, a whole moving town. At the front of the army rode Medb herself, in a small wooden chariot, the long copper-red hair loose to the small of her back, the crimson gown bright across the moving plain. The story does not pretend she was an ordinary queen. It says outright that she led from the front. At Chulainn, before the march began, the druids had spoken a quiet warning. They had seen in their reading a young man at a river, holding the way alone. They had not been able to see his face clearly. Medb had heard. Medb had decided to go anyway. News of the army reached Emain Macha in the same week. Messengers ran in. King Conchobar tried to rise from his bench. He could not. The pains of the curse of Macha had taken him with the rest of the men. The hall was full of warriors who could not move. The boy troop on the green outside were too young to be touched by the curse. The very old were too old. Chulainn, by some old half-explained reason, was outside the curse altogether. He was the only grown warrior in Ulster who could rise. He went to see his uncle in the hall. The king said little. He did not have the breath for a speech. He gave one instruction: slow them down, hold them at the border. We will come when we can rise. He did not waste time. He left the hall. He found Lag. He had the chariot prepared. He rode out from Emain Macha that same night, with 2 black horses in the traces and the gay bulg laid in the chariot beside him. He went south to the border alone. His mother lived close to the border. He stopped at Dún Forgaill for a few hours on the way. He did not say where he was going. He did not need to. She gave him bread. She gave him a clean, undyed linen tunic, and she let him go. Emer was, of course, by then his wife. He had won her back from her father's fort in the year after Scáthach. We will tell that part later, more gently. For now, she was at the small round house at Dún Forgaill with his mother, and she was watching him go. She did not call after him. She did not run. She stood at the doorway, one hand on the worn oak frame, and she watched the chariot grow smaller along the dirt track toward the south. Maybe you know what that kind of standing costs. He drove south through the long green plain of Mirthamney, his own country, the cattle of his own people scattered across the dry stone-walled fields, black and white, quiet, familiar. He looked at them the way you look at the things you intend to keep. They reached the southern edge of Mirthamney by evening. He could see, far across the next valley, the first wisps of smoke from the campfires of the great army. There were hundreds of them. The smoke rose and joined into a single faint cloud over the southern plain. He drove down off the ridge and chose his ground. There was a shallow river in the valley below, a ford, pale flat stones, low banks of cropped grass, dark woods on the far side. It was the kind of place a single man could hold. He set his camp at the near bank. He spent the night at the bank. Leg unharnessed the horses. They ate cold bread and cold beef. Chulainn sat with his back against a single tall standing stone at the bank, the gabolg across his knees, and watched the far woods until the sky lightened. He did not sleep. He did not need to yet. The night was quiet. The water moved over the stones with the small, endless sound water has. Somewhere, in the woods on the far side, an owl called twice and stopped. He watched until the cold became the gray of morning. At first light, the army on the far side began to move. The scouts came down through the trees first, light men in dark cloaks, careful. They saw the chariot. They saw the standing stone. They saw the young man at the far bank, alone, washing his face in the water. The scouts went back into the woods. They did not call out. They went and told the queen. The queen sent her best champion forward as a single combatant. The old Irish way. One man at a time at a marked ford, while the army waited behind. The champion came down through the woods alone, tall, bronze-rimmed shield, long spear. He stopped at the far bank. He called across the water, "By what right do you hold this ford?" The young man on the near side did not answer in words. He stepped onto the stones. The first single combat was brief. The Connacht champion was good. He was not good enough. The young man on the stones moved in a way the older warrior had not seen before. The spear went where it was meant to go. The body fell quietly into the shallow water. The scouts watching from the far woods went back to the queen. The queen sent another champion, then another, then a third. The young man at the ford did not leave the water. He stepped onto a different flat stone each time and waited. That was the bargain Chulainn had set with the Connacht heralds in the first hour. One champion at a time. Single combat, by the old law. He would hold the ford. The army would wait. He bought Ulster days at a time, one warrior on the stones. The old Irish would have called this a great honor. Single combat at a marked ford. The whole story stopping to watch one man do one thing well. For a tired person on a hard day, it might also look like something else. A young man alone doing the work the army was supposed to do. He did not say so. He never said so. He took the horn cup of cold water from Laig, and he drank it, and he sat down by the small fire and ate hard bread, and he watched the campfires on the far side. Maybe you know that kind of evening. At the Queen's camp, the mood was changing. After the third champion, then the fourth, then the fifth did not come back, the warriors began to whisper. The Queen heard the whispers. She did not like them. She doubled the wine ration and made them louder. She sent a different kind of message in. She sent a young woman in a fine wool cloak to the standing stone at the ford with a quiet offer. "Come over to our side. Marry me a daughter. Take land in Connacht." The young man on the stones listened politely. Then he sent the offer back. She came back. She had not made the offer well. The Queen sent her own foster brother instead. He came across the ford alone in a small chariot at dawn with 2 horses and a quiet face. He did not draw a weapon. He spoke for 1 minute. The messenger said only, "Every champion she sends will come. There is no end of champions. She has a country of them." The young man on the stones bowed slightly and said, "Only then I will be here." The messenger nodded. He went back. The combats began again. The days began to stack. A champion at dawn, a champion at noon, sometimes a champion at dusk. Chulainn took small wounds. He did not stop. Laig patched the wounds with linen and oil and quiet hands at the campfire by the standing stone. He slept very little. He stole sleep in pieces, a quarter of an hour at a time, against the standing stone, while Laig watched the far bank. When he slept, his face went softer than it ever was awake. Only Laig saw that. Around the Queen's pavilion, the talk grew quieter. The number of champions was finite. The number of days the curse held on Ulster was finite too. Both sides were counting. Both sides were trying not to be the first to run out. One evening, in the long quiet between two combats, a tall, pale woman in a dark cloak came down to the riverbank on Chulainn's side. He did not see her arrive. He looked up, and she was already standing on the stones, 3 paces away. She did not say her name. He recognized her anyway. The old harpers at Emain Macha had described her well. She was one of the 3 faces of the Morrigan, the Queen of Crows, the goddess who walked beside warriors at certain bends of certain rivers. She offered to fight beside him. She said she could turn the Queen's army back across the river by morning. She said she only needed 1 word from him. The price was simple. Lie down with her at the bank. Become her favored one. The next stories would be hers as much as his. He said no. He said it without heat. He said something like, "I'm here for my country. I'm here for one woman. I am not here to make myself larger by lying down with another." The old story is careful to say he was polite. He was also clear. She did not look angry. She looked for a long second, almost as if she had hoped he would say that. Then her face changed. She said only, "Then I will come against you, 3 times. I will be the eel, the wolf, and the heifer. Tomorrow." She turned. She walked back across the stones. She did not look back. By the far bank she was no longer on the stones. By the dark woods she was not anywhere. A single crow lifted from the top of the standing stone and flew low across the water and was gone. He went back to his fire. He told Legig only that a woman had come and gone. He did not name her. Some names are heavier in the night than in the day. He ate his bread. He did not sleep that night. At dawn she came as an eel. She wound herself around his legs in the shallow water during the next combat. He stamped her into a stone and broke her grip. He did not look down to see what stepped on his foot. The combat went on. At noon she came as a wolf. She drove a small, panicked herd of cattle across the ford toward him during the next combat. He turned the herd with the side of the gaebulg and the wolf with a single sharp blow to the eye, and the herd ran on past, leaving him standing. At dusk she came as a young red heifer at the head of a second small herd. He recognized her this time. He did not strike. He stepped back. He let the herd run past. He watched her go. She stopped at the far bank and looked back at him for a long moment. There is a custom in the old Irish stories that we should pause and notice. Single combat at a ford was not chosen for cruelty. It was chosen because in Ireland, the body of the land was understood to be a body, and the rivers were the joints, and a ford was a knee or an elbow. If 2 armies met and tore each other to pieces in a wide open field, that was not honorable. It tore the body of the land in a place that could not knit. But a ford was a small joint, and combat there was a small bruise, and the country could heal afterward. That is why a single warrior at a ford was not a strange thing. It was the country saying, "Let this hurt happen here, where I can mend it, rather than across the field, where I cannot." Chulainn was, in the old understanding, the bandage as much as the wound. That is one of the small old reasons these stories are still useful. They were never only about glory. They were also about how to keep the country whole when fear came down a road. The young man at the ford was, in his quiet way, doing the work of mending. Maybe that is also a quiet thing to think about, on a Tuesday night, lying in bed. The small joints in your own life that you mend, quietly, again and again, so the country of your house can stay whole. The old story sees you doing it. Back to the ford. The days kept stacking. Combats at dawn, combats at noon, combats at dusk. The young man on the stones grew thin around the face. The wounds on his arms and shoulders began to overlap. One night, very late, the boy troop of Emain Macha slipped out from the green and walked the long road south to find him. They were too young to be touched by the curse. They wanted to help. They were children. They came anyway. They came to the ford at first light. They lined up along the near bank, behind the standing stone, behind Chulainn, 20 of them. He saw them and his face changed. He sent Laig over to take them home. None of them moved. The queen on the far side saw the boys. She sent a small detachment across the upper ford that morning to scatter them. The boys did not scatter. They held the upper ford with their practiced swords for almost an hour. They did not all come home. When the news of the boys reached Chulainn at the lower ford, something in him went very still. Layeg saw it. Layeg had seen it before, when they were both younger, on the playing green. Layeg knew what was about to happen. It came on him slowly. He did not summon it. The old Irish word was riastrad, the warp spasm, the change. His body began to twist on itself in ways the human body should not twist. One eye sucked deep into the skull, the other rose huge on the cheek. A column of dark blood rose from the crown of his head like a mast. The lone light, the hero light, blazed above his brow as a tall flame of white gold. The men on the far bank stopped speaking. Even the queen's chariot stopped at the edge of the woods. He crossed the ford. The army began to come apart in front of him. He did not shout. He did not call out names. He went through the front rank in silence. The riastrad does not need a voice. That is the part of the old story that takes the breath away. He cleared the bank by evening. He cleared the woods by night. He went on through the army's outposts in the dark, finding them by the lone lithe above his brow, which the army had not learned to put out. The queen ordered her camp to fall back beyond the next ridge. By morning, the riastrad had passed. He came back to the ford alone. He stepped down into the shallow water at the bank and washed his face. The hero light above his brow went out. He was a young man again. He sat down on a flat stone and did not speak for a long hour. Layeg brought him bread and water. He ate without looking up. The boy troop from the upper ford that had survived came down through the woods and gathered behind the standing stone again. They did not speak either. The country had bought itself another day. Here's the part the myths never quite make obvious. The riastrad was not a gift. It was not glory. It was something that came on him, because the only alternative was losing the boys and the country. It cost him. That is the part of the old story worth staying with. Some of the things people praise you for, in your own quiet life, you would never have done if there had been another way. The praise does not always match the cost. The old stories know this. The Morrigan came back that evening. Not as a god this time. She came as an old woman, leading a brown heifer, asking him only for a drink of water and a blessing on the milk. He recognized her. He recognized what she was offering. He gave her both. She drank. She thanked him. She rested her hand briefly on his bandaged shoulder. Where her hand touched, the bandage came off cleanly, and the wound under it had closed. She turned and walked back into the woods with the heifer. He did not call after her. He did not need to. After that night, the wounds he took at the ford healed faster. He never spoke of why. Some kinds of help come to you when you have already said no to the wrong help. The right one walks up to your fire and asks for water. The days went on. The queen tried different champions. She tried trickery. She tried, once, a pair of warriors at the same time, sent against the law of single combat. Chulainn refused to fight them together. He stood and waited until they sent only one. He held the old rule even when his enemy did not. That is one of the small things about him that the harpers love to tell. Not the riastrad, not the spear throw. The smaller, quieter thing, the way he kept his own law when no one was making him. At Emain Macha, the curse of Macha began very slowly to loosen. The youngest of the men were the first to be able to lift their hands, then the middle-aged, then the older warriors. The king himself was still the last, but the country was beginning to rise. Messengers slipped down to the ford to tell him. He nodded. He did not let himself rest. He knew what the queen would do next, even before she had decided to do it. The army on the far side had one more champion he had not yet fought, the one he hoped she would never send. That part of the story belongs to the next file. We will come to it in a little while. For now, stay with the picture of him at the standing stone, the boys behind him on the bank, the slow river moving over the pale flat stones. That night, around the turf fire, the boys asked him questions. Quietly, carefully, they asked him how he had stood there for so long alone. He said only, "I sleep against the standing stone." He did not say what else he had been doing. A boy asked him if he was afraid. He thought for a moment, then he said, "Every morning." He said it without dressing it up. The boys looked at each other. None of them spoke for a while. They understood, in the way children understand without explanation. A boy asked him why he kept doing it then. He thought again. Then he said, "Because the morning still asks." He did not try to make it bigger than that. The boys nodded as if he had said something already true. They slept after that. The boys curled in folded cloaks on the grass. Log slept against the side of the chariot. Chulainn slept against the standing stone, the gabog across his knees, his face soft again the way only Lag ever saw. That picture is one of the small ones the old stories keep going back to. A warrior asleep against a stone, a fire burning low, the country safe for the length of a night. The famous parts have not stopped yet, but the famous parts are not what carried him. In the morning he sent the boy troop home. He sent 2 of the older boys to escort the younger. He said it gently, he did not let them argue. They went. They were a quieter group on the road back than they had been coming down. That afternoon the queen sent a 14th champion, then a 15th. Chulainn took both. He took a new wound at the side that Lag had to fold very carefully into the bandage already there. The young warrior did not complain. He had stopped using words for that. That night, in the queen's pavilion across the ridge, a careful conversation happened. Medb sat with 3 of her advisors. They counted who they had left. They came to a name they had not wanted to come to. They argued, then they decided. They sent a runner south, out of the camp, away from the ford, along the back roads. The runner carried a folded message of soft pale linen. He carried it carefully. He was told to put it into one set of hands, and only those hands. We will not yet read the message, we will leave it folded for one more file. But you can probably guess whose hands the runner was running toward. You can probably guess what name the queen had finally said into the lamplight of her pavilion at deep night. Back at the ford, Chulainn slept against the standing stone again. He did not yet know about the runner. He did not yet know about the message. He slept the kind of long, quiet sleep that comes only when you have stopped expecting anything to be easy. Leg watched the standing stone and his friend and the slow river. He thought, the way charioteers think, without much show. He saw the next day coming and he did not want to. He kept that to himself. The warrior beside him went on sleeping. At dawn, another champion came down through the dark woods on the far side. Chulainn rose. He stepped down to the bank. He stepped onto the stones. He met the champion at the center of the river. The combat was over by mid-morning. There would be more before noon. There were 3 combats that day. He took all 3. He took small wounds in 2 of them. Lag patched him at the small turf fire each time. The country bought itself another day. Maybe you know what that kind of day costs the body. The old story knew. He fell asleep before he had finished eating. Lag eased the horn cup out of his hand. Lag laid him down on the folded green cloak by the standing stone. Lag covered him with a second cloak. Lag sat down across the fire and kept watch. There is a love in that the old story does not name. It does not need to. This is the first climax. Stay with it. Long days at the ford, a young warrior alone, a queen counting champions and running out of them. A country slowly rising at his back. A friend across the fire keeping watch. And, far to the south, a folded piece of pale linen passing from one weathered hand to another. A man old enough to know better. A man young enough to be loyal to 2 things at once, even when those 2 things are about to ask the impossible of him. He reads the letter. He sets it down. He does not speak. He stands up from the small turf fire. He turns toward the young man at the doorway. He says the name he has not used for a year. He says, Ferdia, come and sit with me. The young man comes in. Ferdia listens. The queen has asked. The queen has offered everything, lands, gold, her own daughter. The queen is also threatened. If he will not go, she will have druids speak against him so that no one in Connacht will ever sit at table with him again. He sits down by the fire. He does not answer that night. He does not sleep either. By morning he has decided. He sends a runner of his own back to the queen with a single word folded in pale linen. Yes, we will leave them both there, by their small fires until the next file. At the ford the next morning, Chulainn felt the air change. The combats came as before. He fought them as before, but something further down the road had moved. He could feel it in his shoulders, the way you feel weather coming before you see the cloud. At noon, instead of a champion, a herald came down through the dark woods on the far side. He stopped at the far bank. He did not call across the water. He stood there with both hands open. He was waiting for someone behind him to step out of the woods. The dark woods on the far side opened. A tall, broad-shouldered warrior stepped out into the light at the far bank. The faint, pale ridges of horn skin along his forearms caught the noon light. He carried a long, heavy spear. He did not yet raise it. He waited. He recognized him before he saw the face, the way you recognize a friend from across a market by his shoulders. The way you recognize the only person you ever sparred with so often that the pattern of his weight on his feet is more familiar than your brother's voice. Ferdia spoke first. He said only the name, Chulainn. The young man at the center of the river answered with his Ferdia. The herald between them stepped quietly back into the dark woods. He did not need to be there anymore. They spoke for a long time across the slow, shallow river. Not loudly, not angrily. They talked about Scáthach. They talked about the small fire at the edge of the headland. They talked about the practice spears crossed at chest height between them, year after year, until they could read each other in the dark. Chulainn asked him to go back. He said it gently. He said, "Go back to her, Ferdia. Tell her you would not. Take whatever it costs you. Take all of it. I will not be the one to put a barb into your side." Ferdia listened. He shook his head once. It was not that Ferdia agreed with Medb. It was that he had given his word. In the old Irish world, a given word was as much of you as your skin. To break it was to cut the skin and walk out of it. He could not. He would not. He had come. They agreed on the small things. They would fight in the old way, from dawn to dusk. The same weapons, the same number of strokes. They would rest at night. They would have their wounds tended at the same fire. They would not insult each other. They were not strangers. On the first day, they fought with short throwing spears from the far edges of the bank. They threw, and they caught, and they threw again. The spears flew low across the slow, shallow river all morning. Neither of them took a wound. The river was the same color at evening as it had been at dawn. That night, they sat at the same small turf fire on the near bank. Lug brought them both bread. They ate without saying much. They spoke once about a song they had liked on Scáthach's island. They did not speak about the queen. They did not speak about the next morning. They slept on the same bank. Ferdia went over to a folded cloak Leg had laid out for him, near but not too near. Chulainn slept against the standing stone. Both of them slept lightly. Both of them woke before dawn. On the second day, they fought with longer spears at the center of the river. They each took 2 small wounds, one to the forearm, one to the thigh. They stopped at dusk. Lag patched both of them at the same small turf fire. They ate. They did not say much. On the third day, they fought with shorter swords in close work in the shallow water. The cuts were small. They were also more. The blood in the river made it harder to see. They stopped earlier than usual. Both of them were tired. Both of them looked it. That third night, neither of them slept much. Chulainn lay against the standing stone and watched the smoke from the small turf fire drift up into the dark. Ferdia lay on his folded cloak and looked at the high stars. Both of them, in their separate ways, knew what the morning would bring. On the fourth day, Ferdia put on his full hardened leather corselet. His horn skin would turn most blades. Chulainn picked up the gabolg. He had not used it once in the 3 days of fighting. He had hoped not to. He kept hoping. He picked it up anyway. They fought through the morning at close work. The horn skin turned the smaller spear strikes. It turned the sword cuts. By midday, Ferdia was unmarked, and Chulainn was tired. By mid-afternoon, Chulainn was bleeding from 3 small wounds at the side. Ferdia still had no wound at all. Leg saw it. Leg had been counting since the first day. Leg knew his friend better than his friend knew himself, in the way charioteers know their warriors. He came to the bank. He called across the slow water. He said only one word. He said the name of the spear throw with the foot. Chulainn heard him. He looked at Ferdia. He did not say anything. He stepped back into the deeper water at the center of the river. He lowered the gabolg toward the slow current. He turned his right foot inward. He guided the spear into the water with the side of his foot. The spear throw with the foot. The gabolg, the one weapon Scáthach had only ever taught one student. The barbed bone tip came up out of the dark water at an angle no other spear could have followed. It went under the hornskin from below. Ferdia could not stop it. Ferdia fell to one knee. The hornskin held everywhere except where the spear had come from below. He did not cry out. He looked across the water at Chulainn. He did not look angry. He looked somehow almost grateful. Then he fell sideways into the shallow river. Chulainn waded across the river. He knelt down in the shallow water. He lifted Ferdia gently. He brought him to the near bank. He laid him on the cropped grass at the foot of the standing stone. He sat down beside him. He did not speak. Leg came over. Leg knelt down on the other side. He did not say anything either. Ferdia opened his eyes once more. He looked at Chulainn. He smiled, very small. He said, "Well thrown, brother." He closed his eyes. He did not open them again. Chulainn sat there for a long time. He did not cry. The old story is careful about that too. It does not say he wept, it says only that he sat, that he laid his hand flat on his friend's chest and did not move it for an hour, that the slow river kept moving past as if nothing had changed. Across the woods on the far side, the herald who had brought him crept back through the trees. The herald told the queen. The queen, in her tall crimson pavilion, did not celebrate. She sat for a long time looking at the lamp. Then she gave the order, "Strike camp, begin the slow turn home." She did not pretend the war was won. She did not pretend it was lost. She had taken the brown bull of Cooley by other means while the ford had held Chulainn. She was going home with the bull. She was going home with one warrior fewer than she had begun with. That was the count. At the near bank of the ford, Chulainn finally rose. He let Log take Ferdia's body. He helped Log lay it carefully across the small wooden chariot. He walked beside the chariot all the way back to a low rise at the edge of the dark woods on the far side. He left his friend there with the spear laid across the chest. He came back across the ford in the chariot beside Log. He did not look back. Neither of them spoke until they had reached the standing stone at the near bank. There Log put one hand briefly on Chulainn's shoulder. Chulainn lowered his head, only a little. They went on home. At Emain Macha, the curse of Macha lifted that same evening. The men of Ulster sat up on their long benches. They stood. They reached for their swords. They went out to the gate and looked south, expecting an army. They saw only one small chariot coming up the long road, slowly, with two tired young men in it. That is the end of this part. The army turned home. The boy at the ford did his work. The country was held. The friend who could not be turned aside was buried at the edge of the dark woods on the far side. The Hound of Ulster came home older than he had left. That is where we will leave him for tonight, for a while. He healed slowly. The wounds he had collected at the ford were not all small. Emer washed them at the small round house at Dún Forgaill. She did not ask about Ferdia. She had heard. She let him decide when to say his name. He said his name finally, one night, after a small meal, Ferdia. He said it the way you say the name of someone you owe a debt you cannot pay. He did not say more. Emer rested one hand on his and did not move it for a long minute. The fire moved low between them. He slept long that first week home. He slept in his own bed. He slept in his own house. He woke in the night sometimes and went out to the doorway and stood there looking at the low rise where his cattle grazed. Then he came back in. He never went far. King Conchobar came to see him in person, riding down from Emain Macha with a small honor guard. He thanked him at the door. He did not make a speech. He laid one heavy hand briefly on the younger warrior's shoulder, the way he had laid it on a small boy in a forge yard years before. The Red Branch warriors came too. One at a time, they did not stay long. They left small gifts at the door, a bronze cup, a folded cloak, a sealed jar of mead, a thin gold ring. They did not knock. They did not want him to feel watched. Emer brought the gifts inside and stacked them quietly in a corner. The boy troop came, the ones who had survived the upper ford. They came together, a smaller group than before. They stood in the yard. They did not ask to be invited in. He came out and sat with them on the stone bench by the door for an hour. He listened more than he spoke. One of the boys asked, very quietly, was it worth it? The young warrior did not answer right away. He looked at the low rise where his cattle grazed. He looked at the door of his own house. He said only, for this, he did not need to say more. The boy nodded. Time passed in a way the old story does not measure carefully. A summer, a winter, another summer. He healed. He grew a little quieter. He worked his own small herd. He sat at his own small fire. He kept the warrior's craft but did not push it. The famous parts of his life seemed for a while to settle behind him. He and Emer made a kind of life there in the small round stone house at Dún Forgaill. They did not have a child. The old story tells of a son he had had once, far across the eastern sea, before he came back to Emer. That son had come to find him, and they had not known each other, and the meeting had ended in grief. He did not speak about that son to Emer often. When he did, she listened without trying to make it smaller. She let it sit on the table between them, the way a heavy thing sits until he could pick it up again himself. Some grief is kept by being acknowledged. The old story knew that too. He went up to Emain Macha now and then for feasts. Sometimes he sat at the king's right hand. Sometimes he sat further down the long bench, by the boy troop, where they could see him without it being a ceremony. He preferred the second seat. He did not always get to choose. One winter, there was a great gathering at the hall of a troublemaker called Brickrew. Brickrew liked to make heroes argue. He liked to set them against each other for the high seat. Chulainn went. He did not want the high seat. He went because Conchobar asked him to. 3 warriors stood up to claim the high seat that night. Each of them had a strong claim. Brickrew watched, pleased. The hall watched, less pleased. The king watched, very tired. A test was set, a beheading game, of all things. Chulainn took the test. The terms of the test were old and strange. The stranger offered to let any warrior strike his head off with the axe, on the condition that the warrior come back the next night and let the stranger strike his head off in return. The first 2 warriors took the axe. They did not come back the next night. Chulainn came back the next night. He laid his head down on a low oak block. He told the stranger to take his stroke. The stranger raised the axe. He held it. He brought it down with the flat side, not the edge. He set it down on the wood. He said, "You have won the high seat." The stranger was not what he had seemed. He was an old shape that walked in the old stories, testing warriors quietly for the qualities the harpers thought hardest to teach. Chulainn had passed the test by doing the simplest possible thing. He had kept his word even at the price of his neck. He took the high seat that night without ceremony. He did not make a speech. He did not crow. He sat down. He ate his meat. He let the hall move on without him. Brickrew sulked in a corner. Conchobar smiled, very small, into his horn cup. The story closed quietly. He went home to Emer the next morning. He told her about it. She laughed once, quietly, into her embroidery hoop. She did not say a word. She did not need to. The story added one quiet line to her opinion of him, and that was the only line that mattered. Years passed like that. He went up to feasts. He came home to Emer. He held the small joints of his country quietly when small troubles came up. He did not become famous beyond what he was. He did not become small either. He stayed about the size of the man Scáthach had finished, and he carried that size with care. Sometimes in those quieter years, Lag came up from the south to visit. They sat on the long stone bench by the door, Lag with a horn cup of milk, Chulainn with a horn cup of water. They did not always talk. They watched the cattle. They watched the long whitethorn hedge. Lag never asked him about the ford. Lag had been there. Lag knew what the ford had cost. Some friends keep the old wound by not opening it. Some keep it by sitting beside it. Lag was the second kind, so was Chulainn by then. Emer warmed to Lag early. She did not warm to many people, but she warmed to him. She gave him bread without measuring. She mended his cloak when it tore. She did not call him by any title. She called him by his name. He always seemed grateful to be called only that. Sometimes the Morrigan came past, not in the dark cloak, not as a god. She came as an old woman with a bundle of mugwort, or as a young woman with a bowl of milk for sale at the edge of the road. She did not ever stay long. She would catch his eye, nod, and walk on. He let her come and go. He did not ask her what she was watching for. He did not ask her why she came past Dún Forgaill more often than most quiet roads should be walked. Maybe he already guessed. Maybe he had decided that the answer did not change how he wanted to live in the meantime. He did not return to the ford itself for a long time. There was no need. The slow, shallow river still ran. The pale, flat stepping stones were still there. The standing stones still stood. He could see the place in his mind whenever he closed his eyes. He did not need to walk back to look at it. At Connacht, in those same years, Medb did not forget him either. She had taken her bull. She had lost too many champions. She had had to bury her foster brother. The brown bull and the white bull, when she had brought them together, had killed each other. The story did not turn out the way she had imagined it in the bedchamber. That did not stop her wanting. The old stories are honest about that. She could have let the matter rest. She did not. She nursed a slow, patient grudge. The way some people nurse a slow, patient grudge. Not loudly, not visibly, but for years. She waited. She listened. She gathered. There was a sorcerer named Celtic in the south of Connacht. He had been killed by Chulainn during the cattle raid years before. Calatin had left 3 daughters and 3 sons behind. Medb sent for them. She asked them what they wanted. They said only one name. They said his. Medb sent them away to learn. She sent them to old shapes in old places. She sent them to teachers who would not have spoken with her. They came back, 10 years later, with old kinds of skill that the open country had mostly forgotten. They came back ready. The old stories make the children of Calatin more sinister than they really were. They were grief-shaped, they were grudge-shaped, they were also, if you read it gently, only 6 children who had lost their father in the same war that took Forgaill from Chulainn. The country had broken many small families. They were one. They came north slowly. They did not march. They drifted. They appeared at fairs. They appeared at well springs. They spoke softly. They left small, careful illusions in fields, armies that were not there, shouts in the night that no one had made, smoke from camps that had nothing under them. The country grew uneasy. Word reached Chulainn at Dún Forgaill. He listened. He did not panic. He sent Leg to look at one of the fields where false smoke had been seen. Lag came back nodding slowly. There had been no camp. There was no track in the grass. The illusion was good. The illusion was old work. He sent word to Emain Macha. The king sent word back. Stay home. Do not leave Dún Forgaill. Do not chase phantoms. The Red Branch warriors will come south. Cathbad the druid will come with them. Stay where you are. Chulainn read the letter. He folded it. He put it on a shelf. He stayed. The illusions came closer. False armies on the next ridge. False battle shouts before dawn. False columns of smoke at the edge of his own pasture. He still did not move. Emer watched him. She watched his face. She watched the small private struggle of someone choosing not to ride out. There was a small set of vows on him from a young age. The old Irish called them gesa, singular, geis, things he could never do. He must never refuse food offered by a woman at a low fire. He must never eat the flesh of the dog whose name he carried. The gesa were old. They were not optional. The children of Calatin knew the gesa. They had learned them in the old places. They began very carefully to set the kind of small situations that would force a kept vow against another, to make him break one geist to honor another. It was not a fast trap. It was a patient one. That part of the story has too many moving pieces for one quiet night. The short version is this. They wore him down by small tricks for many days. They tightened the snare around him slowly. They drew him out of Dún Forgaill a few hours at a time. They did it in a way that even Cathbad, who was riding south, could not quite warn him in time. At last, on a morning he had not expected, 3 old women appeared at a small turf fire by the side of the road at the high pass of Sliab-Fuait. They were cooking dog meat on a low spit. He knew the geis. He knew the moment. They smiled at him. They offered him a bite. He could not refuse food from a woman at a low fire. He took the bite. That bite cost him more than any wound at the ford. The story is clear that something inside him went thin in that moment. He thanked the old women politely. He got back into his chariot. He drove on. He did not say what had happened. He did not need to. The road already knew. It is worth pausing here, on the high ridge in the wind. The old story has been carried across centuries to reach you. Monks copied it on vellum by candlelight. Mothers told it to children at the bedside. Harpers sang it at firesides in halls that are gone now. Each generation kept what they needed and let the rest soften. The monks kept the geis and the riostrad. The mothers kept the doorway of the forge. The harpers kept the small fire by the standing stone. None of them kept all of it. Together they kept enough. That is the small way old stories survive, not by being written once and stored in a chest, by being told, by being half forgotten and then remembered, and forgotten again, and remembered again, until enough of them are awake at the same time to keep the old shape upright. You are part of that chain tonight. Whatever piece of the story stays with you in the morning will become the piece you carry. You do not need to remember all of it. The old story only needs you to remember the bit your own life can hold. Maybe that piece is the boy in the doorway. Maybe it is the friend across the river. Maybe it is the small turf fire at the standing stone. Maybe it is something quieter than any of those. Whatever it is, let it be enough. We can go back to him at the high pass now. He drove on. He could feel something thinning in the air around him after the bite he had taken. The hero light at his brow was less steady. The wounds he had taken at the ford years before, The ones that had healed began to ache, slow and small. He did not turn back. At a low river crossing further on, Laig pointed at the bank. There was a young woman kneeling there, washing a dark linen tunic in the cold water. She was alone. She did not look up when they passed. Laig's hand on the reins tightened. Chulainn looked at the tunic. He recognized it. It was his own tunic, the one he had worn since the morning. He looked down at himself. He was wearing it. He looked back at the woman. She was still washing it in the cold water. That was an omen the old Irish knew well. The washer at the ford only washed the tunics of warriors who would not come home. He did not call out to her. He did not stop. He told Laig to drive on. Laig drove on. The reins were tight in his hands. The Hound of Ulster sat back in the small wooden chariot. He breathed out very slowly. He did not look back at the river. He had been told what he needed to know. He told Laig then that he wanted to go on toward the south, toward the next pass, where messengers from Emain Macha said an army of the children of Celtic was gathering. He did not say anything about the river Laig had seen. Laig knew they drove on south. They came down into the low pass before evening. The children of Celtic were waiting. They had laid the ground carefully. They had set spells over the cropped grass that they had stripped of footprints. They had 3 throwing spears between them, each of which had been made with a small careful curse that no shield would turn. They came down out of the chariot in the green pass. He sent Laig back with the horses to keep them out of reach. He walked into the pass alone. He did not run. He carried the gaybolg in his right hand. He carried the round bronze-rimmed shield on his left arm. He carried what he had carried for years. They threw the first spear. It went past him. It missed by an inch. The story says it killed Laig, far back on the road with the horses. Chulainn felt the loss before he saw it. The hero light at his brow guttered. He kept walking down into the pass. They threw the second spear. It struck him below the ribs. He did not stop. He pulled it out. He kept walking. They threw the third spear. It struck him deeper. He did not stop. He pulled it out as well. He kept walking. He was still on his feet. He did not run. He reached the half circle. He did not raise the gaybolg. He did something else. He said, very quietly, "Let me go to that stone." He pointed at a tall lichen-marked standing stone on a low rise at the edge of the pass. They looked at each other. They nodded. The old courtesies still held, even for them. He walked over to the standing stone. He did not run. He carried the gaybolg in his right hand and the round shield on his left arm, and his cloak still pinned at the shoulder. He sat down briefly at the foot of the stone. He looked at the western sky. He decided what he was going to do. He took the belt from his waist. He stood up. He laid his back flat against the standing stone. He passed the belt around his own chest and around the stone. He tightened it. He fastened it. He bound himself to the stone so that he would not fall when his legs gave out. That was the choice. He could lie down. He could not. He had been the boy at the doorway of the forge. He had been the young man at the ford. He had stood there for years quietly while the country slept. He would stand here too. He would die on his feet. The children of Celtic stood at a careful distance. They did not come close. They did not yet take the killing stroke. They were not sure he was finished. The old story is honest about this. He just was not letting his body show it. They waited. A small thing happened then that the old story always keeps. An otter came out of the small river at the far edge of the pass. A river otter. Brown, wet, curious. It crossed the cropped grass at the base of the standing stone. It lapped, very small, at a thin trickle running off his side. Then it slipped back to the water. The Hound of Ulster looked down at the otter. He smiled, very small. He did not laugh. He said something the old harpers always kept. He said, "The small things finished me." The otter slipped back across the grass into the slow water of the river beyond the rise. The light was going. He stayed at the stone through the slow last light. The hero light at his brow finally went out. The shield on his left arm lowered, slowly. The gaybolg in his right hand pointed downward. He stayed upright. The leather belt around the chest of a young warrior and the lichen of an old stone held him standing. The children of Celtic still did not come close. They could see him at the stone. They could not tell if he was alive. They waited the way you wait when you are uncertain about a wolf in a snare. They waited for a sign. The sign came in a way they did not expect. A single large black crow lifted from a low blackthorn tree on the south side of the rise. It flew low across the cropped grass. It landed on the lichen of the standing stone, just above the warrior's bound shoulder. It looked down at him. It did not move for a long moment. Then it settled. That was the sign. The crow on the shoulder. The Morrigan had come back. She had not come to fight. She had not come to help. She had come to be the one who confirmed it. The Hound of Ulster was finished. She settled on his stone. She did not move again. The children of Calateen came forward then. They came carefully. They did not look at him. They looked at the crow on the stone above his shoulder. The eldest of the daughters stepped up to the standing stone. She did not look at his face. She did the work that needed doing. She did it quickly. They did not stay. They were not the kind of enemies who lingered. They had done what they had come for. They left. They walked back across the cropped grass. They went south. They did not look back. The crow on the stone watched them go. The crow did not move from the stone. The Red Branch warriors came to the pass the next morning. Cathbad the druid was with them. They found him at the stone. They did not need to ask whether he was gone. The crow was still there. The crow was the answer. They lowered their heads. They did not cry out. They had been warriors a long time. Cathbad walked up the rise alone. He stopped a few paces from the standing stone. He did not loosen the belt. He did not move the body. He bowed once, slowly. He said something none of the warriors below quite heard. The crow lifted from the lichen, finally, and circled once above his head and went south. They lifted him from the standing stone with great care. They loosened the belt. They laid him down on a folded dark cloak on the cropped grass. They did not change his expression. The small silver gleam of hero light at the brow was gone. He looked, the old story says, less like a famous warrior and more like a young man asleep. They carried him north. The road back to Dún was long. They took it slowly. The boy troop met them at the high pass of Sliab Fuait. The boys had heard. The boys walked the rest of the way home beside the cart, on either side, all the way down through the green plains to the small round stone house at Dún. Emer was waiting in the doorway when they came up the dirt road. She had heard from a runner an hour before. She had not collapsed. She had not cried. She had washed her face with cold water at the small pale stone bowl by the door, and put on the green overdress and the bronze torque he had given her, and stood very still in the threshold. The cart came up the slope of the small yard. They lowered the folded dark cloak from the cart. They carried him into the round stone house. They laid him on the low oak bench by the fire. Emer did not speak. She knelt down beside him. She rested one hand flat on his chest. She did not move it for a long time. They left her there alone with him after a while. The warriors went outside. The king sat down on the long stone bench by the door and looked at the cattle. The boy troop sat on the cropped grass below the yard. The story does not say what Emer said to him inside the small round stone house. The story is right not to. The next morning they made the small, careful grave. They dug it on a low rise at the edge of the long whitethorn hedge, where the cattle would still pass it, where the wind would still cross it from the gray sea. They lowered him into it themselves. They covered him with the dark green cloak. They closed the earth. They did not raise a big mound over him. They raised a small low one, planted with grass. They set a single low standing stone at the head of it. They did not carve his name on it. The old Irish knew that the people who needed to know whose grave it was would know without a name. They were right. Emer stayed at the small round stone house at Dún. She did not remarry. She did not return to her father's fort. She kept the small herd. She mended the small gate when it broke. She walked out to the low grave mound at the whitethorn hedge most mornings and sat with him for a quarter of an hour and then walked home. She did not live a long life after him. The old story is honest about that too. She lived another year, maybe two. She died, the harpers say, at the same small low grave at the whitethorn hedge, one quiet morning, sitting upright on the cropped grass, with one hand laid open on the dark green of the cloak under the earth. They buried her beside him. They raised a second small low grass-covered mound right next to the first. They did not need a stone for hers either. The people who needed to know whose grave it was already knew. The harpers carried both names south and east and west for centuries afterward. That is the end of the long part of the story. The famous parts are over. The Riastrad, the ford, the friend across the river, the standing stone, the crow on the lichen, all of it has happened. The Hound of Ulster has been laid in the green field where his cattle still graze. It is worth pausing again before we go to the meanings. The omens before his last ride did not arrive all at once. They arrived in threes: the washer at the ford, the old women at the small turf fire, the crow on the lichen. The old Irish knew that warnings always came in threes. The threes were not magic numbers. They were a way of saying, the world has spoken about this once, twice, 3 times, and the speaking is not the same as the deciding. You can read 3 warnings and still walk into the pass. Most of us do sometimes. That is one of the small reasons the old story still meets people now. Most of us in our smaller lives get our threes too. A small ache, a bad feeling in a meeting, a friend's careful word. We hear 2 of the 3. We decide we have to keep walking anyway. The old story sees us. The Hound of Ulster did not have a way to stop walking. The Geis were old. The promise to Conchobar was older. The country was, in his understanding, what he was for. Most of us have smaller versions of that too. The old story does not blame him. The old story is honest about what comes after. That is one of the small old lessons the country has been carrying alongside the spear throw and the riostrad. The hero is not only the one who fell on his feet. The hero is also the one who stayed in the doorway after, and kept the cattle, and went on quietly for a year. There are 2 heroes in this story, not one. From here, the rest of the long telling will be shorter. We are coming down off the high ridge. The famous parts are behind us. The slow understanding parts are ahead. We will sit at the fire for a while longer. We will let the meaning settle. We will not raise our voices. The Red Branch warriors kept his memory carefully. They told his story at the same long benches he had sat on. They did not always agree with each other about which part mattered most. Some held the riostrad, some held the ford, some held the doorway of the forge. Each kept what they could carry. At Connacht, the queen lived a long time after him. She did not raise an army against Ulster again. She did not pretend she had won. She did not pretend she had lost. She kept her green plain. She kept her great hall. She kept the careful quiet a person keeps, after they have seen the cost of their own want too clearly. The old druid Cathbad lived long enough to see his prophecy come fully true. The boy who took up arms that evening at Emain Macha became a great warrior. The boy was short-lived. Both halves of the prophecy were honored. Cathbad did not seem proud of the prophecy. He had only ever said what he had seen. The boy troop grew up. The ones who had stood at the upper ford as children grew into men who told their grandchildren about the morning their hurling sticks had held a small ford for an hour. They did not boast about it. They mostly told the part about the small turf fire at the Standing Stone the night before. The Morrigan walked on through other stories. She did not come back to Dún Forgaill after the crow on the lichen. She had no need. She was in her own way, satisfied with that one. She had asked him once on a stone in a river. He had said no. She had told him she would come 3 times. She had come 3 times. Scáthach is said to have lived on for a very long time on her bleak rocky island. She did not come over the sea for any of it. She did not need to. The young warrior had carried her teaching home with him. The teaching had done what it was made to do. She watched the small fire on her headland and let the smoke drift west. The Hound of Chulainn, the original guard dog, was long gone too. The smith Chulainn was long gone. The forge was long gone, but the road past the forge was still walked. People who walked it would sometimes stop at the place where the building had been. They would not know quite why they had stopped. The standing stone at the pass where he had died began to be marked, very quietly, by people who walked past. Small offerings, pale flat stones balanced one on top of another. A small bundle of mugwort tied with red cord. The kind of small markers people leave at places where the country has been touched. That is the small way countries carry their old stories. Not by statues, not by speeches. By small cairns of 3 stones at the foot of a tall standing stone on a hill above a low pass, where a young man once chose to die standing rather than sitting. Most of those cairns have fallen since. Some have been rebuilt. We will end this long file at the cairn. 3 flat gray stones at the foot of the standing stone, half sunk in green grass. The warm amber light catching the worn surfaces. The country quiet. Whatever piece of his story you carry into sleep tonight, let it rest at the foot of that cairn for a while. The cairn will hold it. This is the final climax. Stay with it. A young man bound to a stone, a friend dead on the road, a crow on the lichen, a king walking up a rise in the white wolf-skin cloak, a grave by a whitethorn hedge, a wife in the doorway who did not run. He did not die for the high seat. He did not die for the spear throw. He did not die for the Riestrad. He died on a low rise above a small pass, in his own country, bound upright to an old stone, because he could not lie down. The old story is careful to keep that part exactly true. The choice mattered more than the wound. The choice mattered more than the spear. The choice mattered more than the army at the river years before. He had decided, in the small space left in his own body, to keep his weight on his own feet for the last quarter of an hour. He had succeeded. That is what the country kept, not the throw of the god Bolg, not the Riestrad, not the high seat at Brickroos. The country kept a small, steady choice of weight on his own feet. The country has been telling that part of the story to tired people for over 2,000 years. We will end here for the file. He is at the stone. His friend is on the road. His wife is in the doorway. His country is going on. His story has settled into the green grass at the edge of the long whitethorn hedge. The cairn is still there at the rise. The next file will begin to lift the meaning out of the green. So what is this story actually about? Not the spear throw, not the Riestrad, the thing underneath the famous parts, the thing the country has been carrying for 2,000 years. It is about holding the line for others when no one is coming. The river at the ford, the boys behind the standing stone, the country sleeping at his back, a single young body keeping a small wide space open. That kind of holding is rarely loud, it rarely gets clapped for. It is the thing you do in your own life that nobody quite notices. The old story names it for you. The old story does not pretend it costs nothing. It is also about what happens when the work crosses into someone you love. Ferdia at the far bank, the friend you cannot turn away. The hardest line in the story is not the army. The hardest line is your own friend walking out of the trees. The story does not pretend it is fair. It does not say Ferdia should have refused. It does not say Chulainn should have walked away. It only shows both of them doing the next right thing inside the wrong situation. The cost is real. The choice is still right. Both at once. It is also about the small, steady choice of how, not whether. He could not avoid the death the Geis had brought down on him. He could choose where to stand. He could choose the stone. He could choose the belt. He could choose to die on his feet. The dignity is in the how, not the whether. That is one of the small old lessons the country has been carrying for a long time. Most of us cannot choose whether something happens to us. We can choose how we meet it. The old story is honest that this is not the same as winning. It is the same as keeping ourselves upright while losing. It is also about the second hero, Ymir, the one who stayed in the doorway, the one who did not run, the one who washed her face with cold water and put on the green overdress and the bronze torque, and stood very still to receive the cart coming up the long road. The country kept her too. The harpers sang her name beside his. They did not always do that, with old warriors' wives. They did with Ymir. She had not waited at home in the soft way old songs sometimes describe. She had waited in a harder, quieter way that the old country recognized. That is the other small lesson the country quietly kept. There are two heroes in this story, the one at the river and the one in the doorway. Both held a small space open against bigger things. Neither got to do it the easy way. Both did it because the country needed it done. There is one more small lesson worth saying out loud. The Riestrad did not come on him for himself. It came on him when the boys behind the standing stone were in danger. The hero light at his brow only rose when other people, smaller than him, needed the line held. That is one of the strange small old facts of this story. The most extreme version of himself only ever appeared on behalf of others. Never for the high seat, never for himself. The country noticed. The country kept that fact under everything else for a long time. That might be the part of the old story that meets a tired person now most clearly. The version of yourself you are most afraid of, the version that snaps at the edge, does not usually arrive for your own benefit. It usually arrives the day someone smaller than you, in your own house, finally needs it. There is also the small old lesson about omens. 3, always 3. The washer at the ford, the old women at the fire, the crow on the lichen. You will get your own 3. Sometimes, you will read 2 of them. You will keep walking. The old story does not blame you. The Geis is the other small old lesson, the vow you carry, the thing you cannot do. Sometimes the world arranges itself so that 2 vows you carry contradict each other. The old story is honest that this is not your fault. You will lose something either way. The old story honors you for noticing. There is the smaller old lesson about the doorway of the forge. He killed a guard dog. He offered to be the guard dog. The old story keeps that part more than the spear throw. Make amends in the same shape as the harm. Do the work of the thing you broke until the thing you broke has a replacement. The forge is one of the small old reasons the country still trusts him. Not the Rheostrad. The doorway. Most countries trust people who, after breaking something, try in their own person to be the thing that was broken. He did that as a child. He kept doing it as a man. The small last lesson is about the otter. The small wet brown river otter at the foot of the standing stone. The small thing that came up out of the slow water and lapped at a thin trickle and slipped back. The thing the dying warrior smiled at. The small things finished him, he said, not the army, not the queen, not the children of Caelitin, the small things. That is what the country quietly noticed too. The small things finish us, not the great planned griefs, the small one we did not plan for. A bite of bread at a fire we should not have stopped at, a glance at a tunic in the water, a small otter at the foot of an old stone. The story is honest about that. That is enough meaning for tonight. Hold whichever one feels close. The ford, the doorway of the forge, the friend across the river, the standing stone. The doorway of the small round stone house, the otter, the small low grave mound by the long whitethorn hedge. The country still going on past all of it. His name did not stay in the old country. It traveled. Monks copied it onto vellum. Harpers carried it across the sea. By the time Ireland began to write itself down in modern letters, he was already one of the small old shapes the country kept reaching for. In the late 1900s, Lady Augusta Gregory and W.B. Yeats reached back into the old vellum and brought him forward into modern Irish writing. Lady Gregory's Chulainn of Morthemne sat on many bedside tables for the first time then. Yeats made him into a quiet figure at the edge of new poems. He appears in their work the way old shapes appear in old work. Quietly, more present than named. He stands in the corners of poems about quiet courage and small steady griefs. He is rarely the loud subject. He is more often the figure the line is leaning on. In 1916, after the Easter Rising in Dublin, the new Irish Republic looked for a small old shape to carry the cost of its sacrifice. It chose him. A bronze statue was cast, a dying warrior bound to a stone, head bowed, a small raven settled on the shoulder. It still stands in the General Post Office. The country has used him in many small ways since, as a quiet symbol of resistance against larger forces, as a quiet symbol of the cost that resistance carries, as a quiet symbol of the small steady choice of how, not whether. Different parts of the country have used different parts of him. He has carried them all. His name is also still in the country itself. The plain of Morthemne is still there. The small ford on the River Dee is still there. The high crossroads of Sliab Fuait is still there. The standing stones along the old roads are still there. None of them have his name carved on them. The country has not needed his name to remember. He appears now in songs, in novels, in folk plays, in small paintings on the walls of small pubs, in the names of streets, in the small careful drawings on the labels of bottles. He has spread quietly into the country's ordinary life without ever quite becoming a brand. The old story has been kind that way. He still meets people in their own quiet lives, the person at work holding the line for a smaller team, the parent at the bedside holding the line for a smaller child, the friend in the hospital corridor holding the line for someone they love. The old story does not announce itself in any of those rooms. It only sits quietly in the back of the room. Maybe that is the small modern legacy. Not the bronze statue, not the songs, not the streets. The small old shape sitting quietly in the back of any room where someone is holding the line for someone smaller. That is what he has become. That is what the country quietly let him become. If today felt a little like that, like holding the line for someone smaller, in a quiet small room with no one quite noticing, then the old story already knows. The bronze statue in Dublin knows. The standing stone above the green pass knows. The small low grave mound at the long whitethorn hedge knows. You are not alone in it. It is late now. The story has settled. Let the room settle with it. The standing stone is still upright. The river still moves. The whitethorn hedge is still in blossom somewhere. Next time, somewhere colder, older, a different kind of fire. Something is already waiting. You can almost hear it. We'll be here when you're ready. Another old story, another quiet night. Soften your shoulders now. Let them down. The story is finished. Your day is over. Let it lay down. Your line is held. Breath in, breath out. The country sleeps. He sleeps. She sleeps. The boys sleep. The cattle sleep.
Good night. Sleep well, the old story has you.